The live stream was supposed to be ordinary. A familiar face, a casual tone. Nothing that suggested danger. The kind of digital moment that dissolves into the endless noise of the internet within minutes. Then he looked directly into the camera and said, "Come on. Break off your tooth. Send it to me." For a brief second, silence followed. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that tightens the chest. Almost immediately, the man appeared to understand what he had done. His expression collapsed. His hands moved without restraint. He struck his own face again and again, crying out that he deserved to die. The words sounded rehearsed and spontaneous at the same time, as if they had been waiting behind his teeth for far too long. What viewers witnessed was not merely embarrassment. It felt like panic, raw, unfiltered, as though a boundary had been crossed and could not be undone. If you are still watching, do not scroll away just yet. Moments like this rarely exist in isolation. Sometimes they are echoes. The phrase itself seemed harmless, almost childish. Yet within hours, online discussions began to spiral. Why did the word tooth provoke such terror? Why did missing teeth appear again and again, like a nerve that could not be touched without consequence? And why did this breakdown remind so many people of another man, one who could no longer explain himself? His name was Yu Menglong. Yu Menglong is no longer alive. Before his death, he left behind fragments, short videos, paintings, awkward pauses, hand gestures that felt out of place. At the time, none of them caused alarm. In retrospect, they read differently, like messages written for an audience that did not yet know how to read them. According to records, Yu Menglong once showed a painting to his viewers and asked a simple question. "Guess what this is?" The answer appeared innocent. 2 pet dogs. Nothing more. But some noticed details that did not belong. Numbers where numbers should not be. An atmosphere that sounded wrong. A voice that echoed as if recorded somewhere far from home. These observations only gained attention after his death. Before that night, Yu Menglong was still speaking, still appearing, still present. Whatever fear surrounded him remained unspoken. Or perhaps it was spoken, but not understood. The internet is filled with noise. Signals drown easily. As the days passed, those connected to Yu Menglong began to change. Some unraveled publicly. Others retreated into silence. A few turned to rituals, symbols, and beliefs that promised comfort when reason failed. None of them named the fear directly. They did not need to. What we are examining is not a single outburst on a live stream. It is not even one death. It is the pattern that emerges when people stop saying what they mean and start hiding meaning where only those desperate enough will look. Sometimes the most desperate cry for help is hidden in plain sight. Fear does not come from guilt alone. Sometimes it comes from knowing too much. The night Yu Menglong died, 17 people were present at the same dinner. That number, by itself, means nothing. There is no evidence that a shared table creates shared guilt. But in the days that followed, something began to fracture among those connected to him. Not legally, psychologically. According to public records and archived broadcasts, none of them spoke directly about what happened that night. There were no confessions, no dramatic accusations. Instead, there were shifts, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. One of them unraveled in front of millions. The live stream that ignited public unease was not his first appearance after Yu Menglong's death. It was simply the first moment where the mask slipped. His eyes avoided the screen, then locked onto it too intensely. His words came too fast, then stopped altogether. When he mentioned the tooth, his reaction was immediate and disproportionate, as if the word itself carried weight far beyond its meaning. Psychologists often note that extreme reactions do not emerge from misunderstanding alone. They emerge from pressure, from association, from fear that something buried has just been touched. Others reacted differently. A young singer scheduled for high-profile performances suddenly found himself the target of mass boycotts. His appearance changed. Viewers described him as exhausted, hollow, stripped of the confidence that once defined his public image. Complaints were filed. Accusations surfaced. Whether justified or not, the effect was the same. His career stalled. Silence replaced music. Another figure, once known for extravagant travel and curated perfection, retreated from visibility. According to online observers, she began seeking solace in spiritual rituals, tarot readings, symbolic cleansings, practices often dismissed as superstition until fear makes them feel necessary. Outwardly, she appeared untouched. Internally, reports suggest a woman trapped between escape and survival, unable to leave without losing the protection she believed still surrounded her. There was also the realist, a man described by those who knew him as pragmatic, transactional, unmoved by sentiment. Money to him was not just currency. It was leverage, protection, control. Tarot readers who analyzed his trajectory spoke not of immediate collapse, but of delayed consequence. Temporary success followed by inevitable reckoning. Whether one believes in cards or not, the pattern is familiar. Arrogance often delays fear. It does not erase it. Then, there was the man accused of taking what did not belong to him. Records indicate a financial dispute involving millions of yuan. After Yu Menglong's death, his lifestyle shifted dramatically. Reports describe a life defined by calculation, appeasing powerful figures, avoiding attention, existing not as a participant but as a pawn. Survival became the priority, not truth. Among them all, one figure stands apart. He spoke. He defended Yu Menglong publicly. He questioned the silence. For that, his accounts vanished. Interrogations followed. Rumors placed him in an environment where isolation is not an accident but a condition. Communication became limited. Requests for meetings were reportedly denied. The only reassurance came from whispers that he was still alive. In a circle defined by fear, speaking is the most dangerous act. What binds these individuals together is not evidence. It is atmosphere. A shared behavioral shift that suggests awareness of something unspeakable. Fear does not require guilt to exist. It requires proximity to danger, to power, to knowledge that cannot be unlearned. At this stage of the investigation, no legal conclusion can be drawn. No single action proves intent. But patterns do not need belief to exist. They simply need observation. As time passed, attention began to drift away from the living and toward the dead. Yu Menglong could no longer explain his behavior. He could no longer clarify his words. All that remained were fragments. Details that once seemed meaningless. Signals that only became visible when the noise quieted. And as the fear among the living continued to manifest in breakdowns, withdrawals, and desperate attempts at spiritual reassurance, one question refused to disappear. What if Yu Menglong had been trying to say something all along? Fear does not come from guilt alone. Sometimes it comes from knowing too much. Yu Menglong did not leave behind a confession. He left behind artifacts. That distinction matters. A confession is designed to be understood. An artifact is designed to survive. It can be dismissed, archived, reposted without context. It can be mistaken for ordinary content until the day it becomes evidence. One of the most discussed fragments is an old video in which Yu Menglong paints a picture and asks viewers a simple question. Guess what it is? The reveal appears harmless. A portrait of two pet dogs. A casual moment of softness, the kind that builds parasocial comfort in a fan community. And yet, long-time viewers noticed something that did not match the tone. The style was different from earlier work. Not merely evolving technique. The lines seemed sharper. The framing more deliberate, as if the drawing had been made under constraints. Some viewers later claimed they could see a number embedded in the artwork. Faint, but intentional. 110. The police emergency hotline in China. It could be coincidence. It could be projection, the human mind turning grief into patterns. But there were additional anomalies, and they were harder to dismiss. The audio in that same video did not sound like home. It sounded hollow, echoing, like a voice bouncing off hard surfaces. The kind of acoustics you hear in a basement stairwell or an empty corridor, where walls give back what you say with a delay that feels like a second voice. In isolation, that detail is not proof. In context, it becomes a question. Where was he when he recorded it? Online investigators compared the visuals in his posts with photographs from known art spaces. Gray walls, texture, flat, institutional lighting. Some suggested he had been held in a basement area, connected to a gallery environment. The theory spread rapidly because it offered an explanation that did not require supernatural assumptions. It required only captivity. But the most unsettling possibility was not the location. It was intention. According to viewers who analyzed his final live stream, Yu Menglong appeared to make a hand motion resembling an emergency signal. It was subtle, quick, the kind of gesture easily misread as nervous fidgeting. Only later did it become the center of scrutiny. People slowed the footage down, replayed it, argued over angles, argued over meaning. Then there was language. In a separate segment, Yu Menglong was reported to have recited lines that sounded ordinary on the surface. Weather, darkness, an umbrella, learning magic. Death as art. The sentences, taken one by one, carried no clear alarm. But when people extracted the first characters from each line, a different message appeared. A message that carried the weight of panic without the sound of it. Today they want me dead. This is the cruel architecture of coded communication. If you say the truth directly, you create immediate danger. If you hide it, you create delayed recognition. It is possible that Yu Menglong was performing. It is possible he was distressed and speaking in metaphors. It is possible that viewers, desperate for order after a tragedy, assembled a narrative from fragments that were never meant to connect. But it is also possible that he understood something the audience did not. That he believed he had no safe channel left. That his only option was to fold the message into something that looked like entertainment until it was too late. This is where the story becomes unbearable, because it implicates the viewer. If the number 110 was real, it was a plea. If the acoustics were real, it was a clue. If the signal was real, it was a warning. If the hidden message was real, it was a countdown. And every one of those possibilities shares the same conclusion. Recognition arrived after death. That is why these fragments haunt. Not because they prove a single theory, but because they force us to confront a scenario where the truth was present, visible, and ignored. The internet does not fail to witness. It fails to interpret. Yu Menglong's artifacts are still circulating, still debated, still reframed by people who will never meet him, who will never hear his voice outside compressed audio, who will never know whether the echo was an accident or the sound of a locked door. But one reality remains fixed. If he was calling for help, the message was not discovered in time. The message was clear. The timing was fatal. Patterns become visible only when placed side by side. Isolated, each case appears survivable. A scandal. A trial. A disappearance explained as procedure. Together they resemble something else entirely. Not chaos, but design. Yu Menglong's death did not occur in a vacuum. It unfolded in an environment where silence is not accidental and fear is not irrational. To understand why his signals went unnoticed, one must examine the conditions that make ignoring signals feel safer than acknowledging them. Across recent years, there has been a recurring phenomenon: individuals who speak publicly, question narratives, or refuse quiet compliance experience a predictable sequence of consequences. First comes delegitimization, then isolation, then disappearance from public view. Not always physical, sometimes social, sometimes professional, sometimes psychological. The mechanism is subtle. No announcement is required. People observe what happens to those who speak, and they learn. Some are arrested and tried in courts whose outcomes are largely predetermined. Others vanish into administrative procedures with no clear endpoint. Families wait. Records stagnate. Official responses repeat the same phrase until it loses meaning. We do not know. This is how a system teaches silence. Not through spectacle alone, but through repetition. Observers often describe this structure as a mafia state. Not because it mirrors criminal organizations perfectly, but because it shares a core principle. Loyalty, enforced through fear. Order maintained through exemplary punishment. In such an environment, truth is not debated. It is negotiated, delayed, or buried. Within this context, Yu Menglong's behavior reads differently. If you believe that speaking directly will invite immediate retaliation, you do not speak directly. You allude. You encode. You disguise urgency as art. You hope someone understands before the cost becomes irreversible. But systems like this depend on one additional factor: collective hesitation. People hesitate to interpret signals because interpretation implies responsibility. If you recognize a cry for help and act on it, you place yourself within the same field of danger. If you dismiss it as coincidence, you remain safe. At least temporarily. This is why the internet failed Yu Menglong. Not through apathy, but through caution. The fragments he left behind circulated widely. They were shared, liked, archived, and debated. Yet action requires certainty, and certainty was impossible to obtain. Every anomaly could be explained away. Every signal could be aesthetic. Every fear could be projection. That ambiguity is not accidental. It is the shield that protects systems built on silence. When commentators speak of secret detentions, unacknowledged executions, and internal purges, they often rely on second-hand accounts. Rumors, insider testimony, leaked information that cannot be verified without access that no longer exists. Critics dismiss these claims as speculative. Supporters insist they reflect an underlying truth. The reality is less dramatic and more devastating. You do not need to prove every case to establish a pattern. You need only show that consequences follow speech often enough to change behavior. Over time, people adjust. They stop asking certain questions. They stop naming certain names. They reinterpret danger as prudence. Survival becomes the dominant logic. Yu Menglong lived inside this logic. If his signals were intentional, they were shaped by a world that punishes clarity. If they were subconscious, they still reflect the psychological weight of living under constant constraint. Either way, his death exposes the same flaw, a society trained to doubt its own perceptions. This is not a story about one man being silenced. It is a story about many people learning when to remain quiet. Even now, discussions surrounding Yu Menglong are fragmented. Some insist nothing unusual occurred. Others believe everything about his final months was a warning. Between those positions lies a truth that may never be fully articulated, not because it does not exist, but because it cannot survive intact. Systems that master silence do not erase truth. They fracture it. They turn it into whispers, symbols, half-statements, and unanswered questions. By the time those fragments are assembled, the person who could confirm them is gone. Yu Menglong is not unique in this regard. History is filled with individuals whose final messages were decoded too late. Their stories become lessons only after the cost has been paid. The danger, then, is not that truth disappears. The danger is that it learns to wait. In such a system, truth does not disappear. It waits. By the time the fragments were assembled, Yu Menglong was already gone. That is the cruel symmetry of stories like this. Meaning emerges only after silence has settled. Videos are replayed. Gestures are slowed. Words are re-examined. What once appeared ordinary begins to feel deliberate. And what once felt harmless begins to feel heavy. Yu Menglong did not leave behind certainty. He left behind doubt. But doubt, when shared by enough people, becomes a form of testimony. It does not accuse. It does not convict. It simply refuses to disappear. Throughout this investigation, no single piece of evidence has demanded belief. Each fragment stands on the edge of plausibility, easy to dismiss on its own. A number hidden in a painting. An echo in a voice recording. A hand gesture lasting less than a second. A line of poetry that only reveals its meaning when rearranged. None of these elements force a conclusion. Together, however, they form something harder to ignore. They form the outlines of a man who may have believed he was running out of time. Whether Yu Menglong was consciously encoding messages or unconsciously expressing fear may never be known. Both possibilities lead to the same realization. He did not feel safe speaking plainly. That alone is a fact worth examining. This story is often framed as a mystery about death. It is not. It is a story about recognition. About how societies conditioned by fear learn to rationalize inaction. How audiences trained to consume content hesitate to intervene. How ambiguity becomes a shield behind which responsibility dissolves. There are no villains named here. There is no verdict rendered. What remains is a pattern of hesitation, repeated often enough to feel normal. People learn when to look away. They learn which questions are dangerous. They learn that silence is rarely punished. Yu Menglong's final months were filled with noise. Live streams, art, conversation. Yet the signal within that noise was not acknowledged until the silence arrived. Only then did the details slow down enough to be noticed. This is the tragedy that cannot be undone. The internet will continue to debate what Yu Menglong meant. Analysts will argue over symbols. Skeptics will dismiss connections as coincidence. Believers will insist the truth is obvious. All of them will be partially right, and none of them will be able to ask the one person who mattered most. What we can ask instead is simpler and far more uncomfortable. How many signals do we ignore because understanding them would require action? How many times have warnings been reframed as art, distress as performance, fear as instability, simply because acknowledgement carries risk? Umanglong's story does not demand belief. It demands attention. Not to prove that something happened, but to recognize the cost of deciding that nothing did. The question is no longer what happened to him. The question is how many signals we choose not to see.